fun. That's right, baby. If you read it 2 seconds ago, you can believe it. TPOS is turning the people on, which means that I am turning you, the people, on because I am Malcolm Tent, and this is the latest in a seemingly never ending series of shoot interviews with persons of interest. I basically only know persons of interest, people of interest, if you will. And I love to sit them down in the hot seat and have them point their, if they're anything like mine, cheap ass internet cameras and shoot the breeze and talk about the past, which leads to the present, which of course leads directly to the future. It's, Einstein would know exactly what I'm talking about. It's all intermingled. This is not a nostalgia trip, kids. This is a history lesson. And today we have a dude who is part of a history of a part of the world that I'm very fond of and somewhat well acquainted with. And that is, of course, the Danbury / Western Connecticut scene and a specific time period, which I've talked about a bit on my other show, Tent Talks Tunes, not to mention the shoot interview series, the 90s. It's amazing that there are so many people out there who look at the 90s as being a period of time that was 30 years ago. To old coots like myself, maybe my guest today, I still think of it as being thoroughly modern and completely current. And actually, in a lot of ways, it is. So we're going to address that thorny issue as I stop yammering and turn everybody's attention to former Trash American style counterman, musician, man of wit, raconteur, music lover, and fellow record geek, none other than Mr. John Howard. Hello, John Howard.
Hello. Hey, what's going on, dude? How you been?
I've been all right, man. It's as we've all been very well informed, it's a new normal, and I've been taking advantage of it by having dudes like you on the interview seats. I'm darn glad to have you here, man.
I'm stoked to be here. Stoked to be here.
Yeah,
it was fun. It was fun back then. We had a great time.
It's always been fun, and
Yeah.
I think we risk degenerating into laughter at certain points on this. Working at the store and being a part of the Danbury scene with all the bands and the personalities and the music. I mean, we'll see how long or I should say how much we can limit the discussion to.
Yeah, right.
It's a big one. So, yes. I can't assume that everybody out there knows who you are or was a customer at the store at the time. Fill us in a little bit.
My name's, you told my name already, so whatever. But I came from the DC area. I grew up digging new wave and stuff and was well into the DC or very early DC scene, listening to HFS and hearing stuff like the Slicky Boys and all those DC bands. And pretty quickly, 82 or so is just into nothing but underground stuff. And not a lot of people at that time were into that. It's me and a couple of my friends. And but it was like my high school had a lot of bands like Scream and 9353 came from the public high school that I went to. There's a well-known band called the Nike Chicks that came from the sister school, the private school. They were like scenesters at the time, and it was all around, so it's you sort of just like think about playing music because that kid that you were at the pool with was in 9353, so it just seems everything seems possible. These people are playing our talent shows, and Slicky Boys played our prom. Tommy Keene played a prom. It just gives you a different perspective. But then I went to New Hampshire, which is exactly the opposite, which was a complete nightmare. And I'm serious. There was nobody. It was all deadheads and the 80s deadheads. Like I was a music fan from way back. I was into jazz and stuff before punk. And my experience with the first deadheads was those are the weirdest guys on the block. Those are the guys like, watch out. They liked the Dead and Zappa, and we're talking, 70s stuff. So they were kind of zonked usually. And that evolved to when I hit college in the mid 80s. Everybody there liked either the Dead, they liked two things. They would like the Dead and some other 60s or 70s thing. So it'd be like they'd listen to the Dead and the band. They'd listen to the Dead and Bob Marley. They'd listen to the Dead and Van Morrison. They'd listen, if you were lucky, you know, this is the total truth, I can tell. You're, if you were lucky, they liked the Dead and Zappa. They did not like Beefheart,
Right.
those people. And so that was the school I was at. But one of the women that I went to school with and was friends with, her brother was Billy Hahn, who you might remember from the earliest straight edge scene. And she said, oh, you and my brother like the same music. And we started talking, we discovered, no, we did not like the same music at all. But we both, her and he both told me about the store, which had pretty much just opened, I think, at that point. And I went in there pretty early and was asking for records, and you're like, what the fuck are you asking for? Like, I think I asked like for the first Royal Trucks record or something like that. And I was trading pretty quickly. I mean, within months, you and I are trading tapes, and I'm meeting people at the store. And it's like, oh, geez, thank fucking God, there's people, you know. And Martha, same thing. Because she's my partner, Martha, was in Ridgefield, and she and I ended up forming Freakbaby like around this time while we're going to the store. And also I started playing with Chris Ludwig, and that's kind of, that begat HCI almost exactly. So we're talking like 88, 89, you know.
Yeah, so now that's sort of triggering a
Brookfield
memory.
House.
Did you actually commuted, you were commuting from New Hampshire to Danbury at the time, were you
I
not?
would come down there all the time because when it just is a habit for me, because like I said, my best friend at the time, who was not into any kind of stuff that I was into, she lived in Brookfield. And so I was just used to driving her back and driving myself, you know. I would just, and I mean, I'm going to a fucking record store. Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, there's a new record store. So I probably hit you in Jerosa. Um, Martha also, there's the city limits people. There's a connection there. Like, have people talked about the importance of that city limits new music night
City
thing?
Limits, it's come
It's,
up a couple of times. We've never really delved into that one at length, although
that would be,
that's
yeah, that's that the three, I would say the three pillars, such that it was, of the Danbury scene were this, your store, XCI, and Shitty Dimwit's new music night. Because everybody would go there at least every once in a while and talk. Like, I mean, you'd find even me and Ray Hoffmiller sitting there talking about shit. And it was, especially at the early days, it was a place where people would, it seemed to me, congregate, you know, because there were never any clubs that we could play at or be at to see bands in Danbury proper. Like, we would
yeah,
all,
that's an issue that we've discussed in the past, was that it was almost kind of amazing that so much was able to happen in Danbury in spite of a lack of certain resources, one of which was a regular steady venue. You know, you
right.
had a lot of the infrastructure like the radio station and places you could hang out, but no place really ever to play.
Yeah, it was a huge struggle. It was really, so I think that we started, Elisa and Martha and I just started hanging out in that atmosphere. You're just like, well, we're not in a band, so we're a band, you know. And I mean, definitely from the friendship, it was because we were such close friends, but it was sort of like, you know, I think Elisa was sick of being a band widow, you know, and wanted to play. And she was in, I mean, she was in Bunny Brains. I'm sure she gave her best in that, you know, and
Well, she actually,
played electric chair.
yeah, well, she and Bobby Bunny actually were the original two Bunny Brains.
Right, right, yeah.
Elise beat me to the Bunny Brains by one day.
I wondered about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
so, but that was, so when we started playing, I want to say winter of 88 into 89 kind of thing. She would drop by Trash and we'd borrow a drum that was there, and she'd bring that drum over. And originally I had a guitar that I'd like put all these strings on it that were different gauges. And so originally I was playing guitar. Martha, of course, being Martha, went and bought a really nice bass and a nice bass amp, and had her shit together and could play jam bass lines in like 2 seconds. But Elisa and I kind of would just trade back and forth, and eventually we just settled on the idea that a strong rhythm section, you can almost put anything over that. And so then Elisa was allowed to sort of roam. But it took us a while. Like our first appearance was on the Christmas tape, and that's Spastic Backhoe. And that song, we are playing totally different instruments than we always do.
Right on. Yeah, that's a righteous piece of cacophony. And we'll get to that in a minute.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
This is going to
So,
be,
but anyway, that's how I ended up in Danbury ultimately, was just that connection. And that's, so I moved there after I graduated from college and
right on. Right
worked
on.
at worked at the mall.
What's that?
Worked at the mall for a year.
Ah, yes, at a record store of some sort. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yes. Record World.
Record World. Yes, some of us do remember Record World. So what was that like, John Howard?
You know, we were, at first it was great because my boss was a guy named Don Camps, who you might know as DJ or Don, or he ended up, he's great. I mean, just a wonderful guy and another big record collector. And he and I met through, I think, different people we knew. Jason, I think I met through Sandy and other people. Jason Camps, and again, City Limits. Widow Brown's was another place people would hang out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we chatted, and he's like, "Oh, well, I need an assistant manager." So when I graduated from college, I graduated on a Friday. I started at Danbury Mall the following Monday morning, working at Record World for Don. But he was a great boss, and so for a while we had run of it. They would let us order everything, and we tried to make it a store that if you wanted to buy records, you could come there and buy something. At that time, it was transitioning to CDs. So we would have good catalog, and we were sort of aware of what was going on. But they eventually, obviously the whole chain was having trouble, and we were kind of an anomaly store. Like, I think a lot of them were not run as well as us, and didn't have record heads running it, you know. And one day we got this memo that said that they'd hired the guy from Herman's to come in and run the store. And I had literally just the day before been over in the Herman's that was next to the mall that was shutting down and had completely been stripped for parts. And I was like, I don't think we're going to last long. I think this is, and I was right. It was like from the time I quit to go work for you, 11 months, that company was gone. They weren't even a year. They just stripped that sucker for parts and sent it on its way.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was one reason why I ended up working at Trash. The other was, although he was fine to work for, in the atmosphere, as far as it goes, it's a fairly abusive job, overtime. We were expected to work like, we would do inventory, lock in inventory, where we were not paid for that. That was just part of our salary. I was paid 22 grand a year, working 60 hours a week. So poverty looked good.
Yeah.
You could only play certain things in the store, which of course drove me crazy after a while. I just was stuck listening to nothing but Stevie B and MC Hammer. And I mean, it was mandated. They would get mad at us if they figured out that we were playing something different. They would call us out. We get little memos about it and stuff. I tried to play when Goo came out. I tried to play it in the store, and I have to admit, it was too intense. You could feel it. Like the store was just like, it just felt so.
Well, that's a funny thing when you think about the different kinds of people who go to different stores. Goo was like a regular at Trash American Style. To me, that was like perfect retail music.
Yeah, it's because it's slick to us. It was a little slicker. It wasn't as raw. So
yeah, but it still rocked, It's
yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I'm not
the energy level was always ratcheted up. Like I always played music that was high energy in the store. A, because I like it, and B, because nobody wants to mope around, while some like a Swan's down tempo track is crushing their souls, Well,
that's See, Chris and I would experiment with playing stuff in the store that would drive people crazy. When we would work there.
Oh yeah, no, I actually discovered one of my very, very, very favorite bands that way. This woman who used to work for me, Amelia, who was way after your time, she would play Godspeed You Black Emperor in the store a lot. And I loved the huge crescendos, but the long, quiet parts, you could just feel, people starting to cower. And I was like, Amelia, this is great, but you can't really play this in the store. But they always stuck with me. Now they're absolutely one of my favorite bands.
And I remember though, collectively, our favorite things to play were things like the Donnie Most record.
Oh yeah.
Drunk John Lennon, like anything we found, like the first Davy Jones record,
Oh God.
played at any speed, and that kind of thing. And so that was, I liked working there. It was great. Chris and I arguing with the straight edge boys and trying to make them buy jazz and stuff.
Oh God. Which, over
It
time,
worked.
it did work with some of them. Yes.
It
Yes.
worked.
I'm very proud and very happy with the fact that I'm still in touch with just about everybody who ever worked for me, and many, 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 many former customers. And I feel kind of like the proud papa watching everybody out there in the world, as they grow and develop and discover new music and start
Right.
families. And it's really cool, to think
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
maybe you and Ludwig did sit down with a kid with a big black set of X's on his hands and somehow turn him on to John Coltrane.
Well, I mean, we know we did, but then there's the other ones who went downhill with the X's on their hands, and
Well,
from straight edge to like no edge to
lifestyle choices. What are you
yes,
gonna do?
exactly, right. So no, it was a fun place to work because it was a little bit of a hub at that time, and there's no internet, so
Right.
you have to put things on a wall and you have to come talk to people, and and I mean, you adapted pretty well to the internet, but it made things more crucial. That physical presence was really important. I mean, bands would come to town and just hang around the store,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Plus,
just because it was some bit had a couch and you could
right.
smoke.
Yeah, totally. And this is also like a really crucial time. And this has come up a number of times in my discussions with other people. The early 90s, especially in, to coin the phrase, the right before punk broke, the year before punk broke with Nirvana and all that, it was literally like a giant cauldron of new music and new ideas. And to me, it was almost like what England must have been like when punk rock still had all of its potential,
Yes.
before it had been turned into a commodity. And
it's an apt comparison. It's
yeah,
because the youngins will talk, and I'll be like, Nirvana, you don't understand. Nirvana ruined everything in my mind. They ruined it. And I don't think they meant to. I don't think anything like that, but that you could suddenly get a Frampton Comes Alive out of that underground scene changed everything. It just, suddenly there's money, suddenly there's photographs, suddenly the production values go up. It's not just a bunch of people playing to play. It's everybody's looking for that fluke hit. It just became obvious, and
yeah.
I don't say that with any bitterness. It's just the thing that happens, it's
It's
inevitable.
inevitable. It's absolutely inevitable. It has always, always, always been that. But in a lot of ways, as far as Danbury goes, it benefited us because for that one little flash in the pan moment when Danbury was going to be the next Seattle.
Well,
it was like a microcosm of what must have been happening in Seattle. People started moving to Danbury to be in bands.
Well, I think though there was that aspect. I mean, it had a nice run of that 6 or 7 years there, and I think that would have happened. That was sort of outside Nirvana in many ways. Like Monsterland kind of had a pre-Nirvana major label career in a way, rather than a post-Nirvana one. It's like we were sort of to me, we're like the last remnants of that era, kind of carrying on in a way. I mean that in a good way. The principles of it. It's like art first, kind of. You'd rather be weird than commercial, but commercial's not the worst thing in the world, but just it's not the point,
Yeah.
And that you immediately, we were all sort of bands out of time in that post Nirvana thing. And I remember running into other bands that superficially you'd think they were like us or the bands from that area, and you can tell they're not. It just that there were considerations as to how do you get signed and what do we look like.
Yeah.
And every label you dealt with, it was impossible for them not to think in those terms. I think, am I going to be able to move this on to a bigger label? Am I going to make money off of these people?
No, it's true. When you had the majors finding everybody from Flipper to the Melvins to Daniel Johnston, that would have been impossible a couple of years. But what major label would ever sign Daniel Johnston if Kurt Cobain hadn't worn a Daniel Johnston T-shirt?
Exactly. I mean, it took them forever to sign Voivod, and they sold hundreds of thousands of records.
Did they?
Or yeah, Metal World, don't you think? Till they, who were they picked up by? MCA with Nothing Face?
Oh yeah, that's right. And it's right.
But
Astronomy
Dimension
Dominee.
Atros and all that, those were pretty big. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I mean, a lot of records. They were
It
pretty
did sell. I
popular.
mean, Astronomy Dominee was a hit, at least to some degree. And
Right.
Voivod
I
was
mean, that's
pretty
maybe
cool.
that's a wrong one to pull out of a hat, but you know what I'm saying? There's like, I don't know.
Well, just the fact that Voivod would end up on a major. I mean, even that kind of underscores the
Well,
whole
there,
thing.
yeah, right, exactly.
When on earth would Voivod have ever gotten signed prior to, you know, alt rock, grunge rock, whatever have you, even though they were like one of the most bizarre metal bands that ever existed, they somehow got caught up in the undertow.
It is weird, and I don't know. I mean, do you think that's, what do you think? Do you think that's a bad thing, like that churn that happened there? Do you think it disrupted something that would have been better if it had continued, or was it,
God, that's such an imponderable, I mean,
should people be allowed to cash in like that if they can? I mean, why not?
the way, I mean, if they were able to actually parlay it into something, and to use the Monsterland example, they're one of the few bands I know who actually did it right. Like they signed the major label contract, but they didn't get completely screwed. They were
Hmm.
able to get some equipment. They were able to get on good tours. They recorded the album as they wanted to. When they made the MTV video, it was the exact video they wanted to make.
Sure.
So it's like if you actually could do that and you could work the system and make it happen, well, awesome. But so many bands don't have that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Monsterland didn't. It sort of broke them up. Ultimately, that whole thing, that pressure. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't want to put it. I'm trying not. I'm not trying to. But it just it's a different ball game. Like all of a sudden, everything means something different at that level.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
it's heavy. Every decision is heavier. It's more of a business decision. So you've got to like think about the perspective you're coming from. You
Yeah.
know.
The way that I always look at it is that we have this tremendous body of music now that we would not have had if people didn't think of being in a band as the cool thing to do, or going to shows as being the cool thing to do, or making a record as being the cool thing to do. For a while, instead of going to football games, people were coming out to gigs, and
Yeah.
instead of doing other stupid things, they were starting bands and making music, and that none of that would have happened if it weren't for Nirvana, basically.
Yeah. It's interesting here in DC. I mean, before the COVID shutdown, people were complaining about the live, like people just don't go to live music. I mean, the numbers are just like that. They don't go to live music like they used to. And I think back on that. I mean, like we were so broke. None of us had cable, particularly. We would just go places because there really wasn't much else to do. We were making ourselves do something. So every week we'd go see a band or two that were our friends or hang out someplace. And I mean, it my daughters are pretty creative. They're on the internet a lot, so I see the kids are still being super creative. So I guess it's all a wash. It's going to happen no matter what. But
Yeah.
the live music thing is definitely, it's an issue. People just don't have that live music experience, the same way
Mm,
they used to.
I think I would have to disagree with you there, at least to a certain extent, because a lot of what I do, I tour doing my solo acoustic thing, or with my band Ultra Bunny, or Anti-Scene, and I find even on my microscopic little level of being a touring musician, people come out to shows. I mean,
Oh,
I
well,
think
I'm generalizing though. I mean, it's like at a level like, yeah, but there's 30% less roughly than would have come out 30 years ago. I mean, that's just what the measurable way. I mean, it's kind of a bummer because when people do come out, or like when we around here, when we play to people who don't normally experience live music like that, which we do, like the Plums, we would play out. We played at the Hirshhorn, right in the atrium, right on the mall. That was our last show. And people would come over and they'd be like, that's amazing. I've never heard music like that before, because we're just, and it definitely, when it's a shame that people aren't exposed in the same way, because people long for that feeling, they like it. And so there are people that cling to it, but it, it's definitely less. I mean, it's kind of a bummer, but maybe it'll bounce back after this. Maybe people will be longing for, and I mean, in a good, standing in a room, being with other people, having a shared experience is going to have a lot more meaning to us after the COVID situation,
yeah,
after Trump. I mean, I'm going to feel like hugging the world.
Yeah, right.
Because I mean, just imagine the relief we'll feel on the 21st of January of this, when this is all done finally. And maybe that'll bring back that shared experience. People are sick of the internet.
Yeah, I mean that could be one of those unintended side effects, what with the ascendancy now of live streaming and concerts online and stuff like that. Like when Anti-Scene, we've done two so far and they were hugely successful. I mean, they were great, like in
Oh, great.
every way you could think of. They were awesome. But the thread, if you look at the comments, as people would chime in, it was like, oh, I can't wait to do this again live. I can't wait to
Yeah,
do this
yeah,
in person. I can't wait to see y'all live again. I think the
yeah.
longing is there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
And I for one will be ready to. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm still doing a lot of recording, and my creativity has never stopped. It's just not in the live arena anymore.
Right.
But even having said that, there's no dust, there's no cobwebs on my instruments. It's
Right.
like
Well, Nice Breeze, we've put out an EP, and then we're putting out. We've already got an album like 2/3 done. That we're gonna. I think it's probably gonna come out February or March.
Now, how does Nice Breeze relate to the Plums?
The Plums are totally different bands. The Plums are dead. The Plums went till 2017 or something like that, and they just died a natural good death. We're just everybody's doing different stuff, and we did it long enough. It's just everybody hangs out. But I basically what I did, we played the Hirshhorn show, and the shows we'd played recently had been so strange that I did this thing where I'm like, if somebody asks us to play and it's a halfway decent show, we'll do it. But I just want to see if anybody asks us to play. And nobody's asked us to play a show since then. So.
Right.
Just left it at that, which is fine though, because we started in 2001. I mean, that went for like 15 years. It's wild. We're like, especially locally, playing at the Hirshhorn's just the tip of the iceberg. It was crazy the stuff we got away with and where we played and how loud we played in those places. And everybody just took it. And in a good way. Like one time we played at a coffee shop, full volume, and they pulled the plug on us because there was some sort of a curfew, but the people in the bar were so mad they brought us back and had us start earlier so that we could then shade. And people were coming up like, oh, it was so loud, shaking the glasses.
Yeah.
But so we played all these cool places that bands don't normally play because we didn't have vocals and we just needed a place to set up and plug in. And it was a good run. It was fun. Made some good
you got one double album out of it at least.
We got a double album. We got a tape, couple of tapes, actually, up on Bandcamp.
When we get to the auto discography part of the
Yes.
Show, we'll cover all that.
So Trash, should we talk about Trash at that time and what it was like? Do you want to talk about that life there, that culture?
We might as well. What I always referred to as the TTE, the total trash existence, man. What was your take on it as the counter dude?
Well, it was a blast, of course. It was Chris and I in that store alone a lot of the time because you'd be out doing owner stuff, which you should, or you'd be in your office doing your shit. So we're, I mean, that's a dynamic duo there. And so our great pleasure was these kids would come in and buy the worst record imaginable. And I wouldn't say we'd be mean, but we would be like, you can do better. You're better than this would be more our message. You have a brain. You don't have to take this,
Well, name names, man. Name some worst records and what would you might have suggested as a substitute?
A uniform choice. And I would have suggested John Coltrane's Live in Seattle.
That's fairly extreme, don't you think?
No, that's the necessary prescription to inoculate yourself against anybody who thinks that, uniform choice, it's in the name.
Oh man, am I detecting something of an anti-straight edge bias here? That this has cropped up once already in our conversation, John Howard.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely anti-straight edge, 100%.
Well, that's true.
Unapologetically, even though when I was working at Trash, I wasn't doing any drugs at all. No, really? I wasn't even drinking, straight as an arrow.
Wow.
I've gotten done doing a lot of stuff. Like I've done it off and on. I mean, I enjoy this stuff. I like bending my brain. Like this problem I have with, so the song Straight Edge, when I was a kid, I never took it as like a thing to do. When I heard that song, I had no idea there was a movement called Straight Edge because it's that early. And what I heard in that song was know why you do what you do. I choose not to do drugs, and here is why. I know why I choose not to do drugs. I choose to do this, I choose to do that. Okay. So my idea was always it's not I'm not trying to choose what he chooses. I'm trying to understand myself and make choices based on my understanding of my personality.
Hmm.
And to me, subscribing so strongly, which I mean, nobody in that band was truly straight edge. Like that's the hilarious thing about Minor Threat. You know, there's not really a straight edge band themselves. And um, it just, I don't know, it seems like a weird mindset to close yourself off to experiences, um, you know, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Yeah.
And as an artist, I mean, everybody their own path. I feel like you kind of should, it's like being a plumber. You should be up to date. You should know how to use your brain to be creative, and you need to be able sometimes to look around corners and have a bent perspective in order to come up with something new. And I, you can't beat it for that kind of stuff, hallucinogenic experiences and stuff like that. But even getting to that state, that mild state of having a few beers or a joint where your brain is a little relaxed and just kind of lolling about in your skull, that's it's not so much that you're creative in that moment, but it just gives you access to other perspectives, other points of view. And so I was shocked when I came up to Connecticut and ran into that straight edge. That was a complete shock to me. I was like, DC was not that kind of scene at all at that time. It was extremely eclectic. We would sit there on LSD listening to Minor Threat. We all loved that stuff. Certainly there were straight edge people on the scene. It was a key part of the scene, but I just remember it being way more eclectic than that. Like there were straight edge bands, there were not straight edge bands. Everybody played on the same bills, half Japanese with all, United Mutations and 9353, who were definitely not a straight edge band, playing with everybody, and Scream, not a straight edge band, but accepted. So it wasn't, I heard Tale of Boston. I heard that through the grapevine back then, again, no internet, that there was the rumors were that if you had long hair or if they perceived that you were loaded in a show in Boston, you'd get your ass beat. And as far as I can tell, that's true. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but there was a period where it seems like that was true. As a punker, I was attracted to the day glow. I was attracted to the witty sort of literary stuff. I did not like the grinding, testosterone kind of jun, 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 jun. So right away, musically, I moved off into weirder pastures, and I mostly like stuff like Flipper or Gun Club, or rather than SSD, 7 Seconds. Like I just didn't like it. Sounded like jock rock to me,
Yeah.
from,
So
from
that
my
must have been a mind
from a
blower.
jazz perspective. So when I came up there to see, it's not that I didn't expect that people were like that there, but to see how prevalent it was and how it really was, everybody was kind of, from my perspective, very much the same, in their approaches. And I picked up that New York hardcore the way it is comp, and I was like, oh, look, hardcore. I haven't listened to this in a year or a couple of years. And I was just like, what is this? It doesn't sound like punk or hardcore. It just was this very Foursquare, predictable kind of music to me. It didn't lacked all of the surprise of Void or Scream, playing shit wrong and coming out with that. So to me, it's like the opposite of that. It just same chords, I guess, maybe.
It just goes to show you how interesting.
So yeah, that's my straight edge thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And it must have been one hell of a shock because, straight edge was, I mean, we were like straight edge headquarters in Danbury forever and ever and ever. And that entire.
Oh yeah, totally. I sold all those records. I sold them hand over fist. I was happy to do it. Most of those kids were nice. It wasn't like that, but it was, to get in discussions with some of them, it was kind of interesting. And I was talking with somebody about it, and I was like, I didn't start to draw a line. It was sort of like they were saying, this is hardcore and that's punk. This is hardcore and that's punk. I got a lot of that. Like at first, I like Billy, some of these kids, I'd be like, "Oh, the Minutemen." They're like, "That's not, that's punk. That's not, you know." And I was like, "Oh, okay," and because I thought maybe I could move them off of Judge and onto the Meat Puppets at first, foolishly. And so
A hell of a jump.
I told you, but no, it should have been the Meat Puppets. Have you ever listened to This Is Phoenix, Not the Circle Jerks? Listen to that. I mean, the Meat Puppets and JFA. I saw the Meat Puppets and I saw JFA and the Sun City Girls on the same freaking bill and loved them
Sure.
both.
Sure.
Bought both of
84
their
tour,
records.
summer of 84. I remember it
Bought
well.
their freaking both of their freaking records. You know, so it seemed possible to me, but no, it wasn't possible. So.
Well, at least you also got to consider too. We're talking about a certain age group, a certain demographic. You get you're really dogmatic when you're a certain age.
I don't think no, you don't have to be if you want to be. There's a lot of converted jocks in that scene, and that mentality. Now, for better, I will say in defense, a lot of those guys did use that as a key to move into other areas, and there definitely was like. There's probably some people who that's it. They only stayed there. There's other people who even dropped off of that, but there were definitely people who used that as a springboard to becoming very creative people doing interesting things, and, but it was a big, we used to, Martha and Elisa and I used to call them the white caps because they'd all wear those white baseball caps all the time.
Ooh, cold cut.
And we're old, man. We're old. We were old then. We were all the way into our mid to late 20s.
That's true. The median age, I've thought about that a little bit. The median age of anybody who went to Trash American Style or worked there was basically late teens to late 20s. Like we covered like a 10-year demographic, and that's a huge gap, especially at that age.
Well, and Danbury was begging for it. Like the radio station and New Music Night, you needed that store. It was just asking. That area was asking for a store like Trash. It just needed it. And you opened your doors and people were just like drawn there because there was that culture was there and was being underserved, and I mean, you weren't going to be able to print money with it, but you made a living for a while off of that, off of nose-pierced kids that were stuck on Depeche Mode. That place was full of them. It was crazy. Now that was another crazy thing that was different. I was like, that high school, Danbury High School, that place was nuts. The kids there, because some of those kids would work at Record World, that place was bananas. At least a third of that school was solid goth. Like,
yeah, that always amazed me
anything like it.
Like, especially coming from South Florida,
Yeah, right.
I've spoken before about how I went to a high school, had about 1,700 students, and I was the only one who liked anything weird, or punk rock. And so to come up to Connecticut, like, all the kids in Danbury High School, or maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are turned on to good stuff. All the kids at the Brookfield High School are straight edge. All the kids from New Milford are a combination of two. It's like, how can this be? How can high school kids?
Baby, XCI.
Yeah, XCI, man, an absolute pillar.
I read about XCI in Rolling Stone. I was working I tried to work at the radio station at Franklin Pierce, and I was music director one year, and we were looking at Rolling Stone, and there was a thing in there about Daryl Ort, if I recall, like a little. I mean, I know this is true. I don't know where you'd find it, but there was a little blurb, I think, summing up or something, just like, hey, look at this radio station, this crazy radio station in the middle of nowhere that's doing this thing. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. This is before I started hanging out there. Yeah. And it definitely, driving through there and listening to that station all the time, it made it a lot easier to live in that area for sure. It created that culture out of nothing. I mean, you could really lay it at, Daryl, huge.
No, he made it happen, and it was before my time living up here, but it was, from what I've seen and read, they actually had a scrapbook at the station at WXCI with all the newspaper clippings from when Daryl turned the station over to a new wave format, and it was hugely controversial. And I do believe that the clip you saw in Rolling Stone was also in that book at WXCI. It actually merited national attention.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
somebody was going to try to go all new wave or punk rock or whatever, because it just was not done.
Well, it was also, he did something like he raised their profile in a way and drew attention to to the station, which then regionally, which then drew attention to the school kind of, and it sort of became a synergistic thing. Like the school was, I think, getting more action because people were hearing about the radio station. And I think we know people who probably were attracted to that school because the sounds that were emanating from the radio station. And it's very, again, sort of like seeing the DC thing. It's very inspiring, to see somebody that's just me, he's a year or two older than me. I'm sitting there struggling at Franklin Pierce. Nobody would play new wave there at all. Like I declared it new wave. I was the music director. I did the programming. They would ignore me. Everybody'd be like, we want to do a classic rock show. And they'd play, want to play Alice's Restaurant all the time. Anyway, so, it was inspiring to read about that, and that definitely was coming down there was good. Hearing about him made me want to come down there and hang out.
Right on. And same deal. You were there, right place, right time. So when
yeah,
you were working at the store, that's when things were really just starting to accelerate. And did you start Freakbaby? Did you and Martha start Freakbaby right off the bat when you came into town?
Before we basically Freakbaby started while I was still at Pierce. So I graduated in 1990. We started playing together. I think I started jamming with Chris. HCI is very early too, Hat City Intuitive.
Mhm.
But Freakbaby, I want to say we started playing when I stopped in through Christmas break, 88, 89. And I think we started seriously practicing playing during that period. But we couldn't do it a lot because I couldn't come down every freaking week, but so whenever I came down, we'd practice and play. Sort of slows you down a little bit. But at one point after practicing for months, we got the bright idea to maybe we should write a song. Because other than I love it. We sound, we're very no wavy, groovy. We would just switch instruments around pretty much back and forth. And just, we don't sound that much different than we did really, we always kind of sounded that way. So then we started corralling it into songs. And that would be about the time that we recorded, because that would be probably fall 89 when you're putting together the Christmas tape, right? Fall, winter there. And that was the first recording that we did was for I Hear Bells. And that was improvised entirely in the moment. And I was playing bass. Martha was playing guitar and Elisa was playing drums, and we recorded it on a condenser mic hanging from the lamp in Martha's bedroom. I stood beside the mic and yelled into it, and the bass amp was furthest away. And that's how that thing sounds. It actually sounds really good, which
I love it.
surprised. My recollection, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is we laughed. It was like just about the first song that was played on XCI from the tape on Greg's, because you took it to Greg, you took the tape, and I remember him, and we're like, I really like the lyrics are hilarious.
Yeah, I love it. I still when I'm doing my radio show on WNHU in West Haven, I do my annual Christmas show.
Yeah.
That one is a staple.
A Swan's Christmas spoof of sorts, I guess.
It's great. Every time I play it, I kind of cross my fingers when I get to the line about mommy kissing Santa Claus, but no one's ever complained.
I played it clean, which is rare for me. That was, I could have done, I thought about that. That's why I came up with the pubic hair.
Yes. And just so people know what we're talking about, that is the I Hear Bells compilation cassette. Yeah.
And cover.
If you could, if the
closer. Look at poor Santa.
Yeah, that's a Tom Monahan cover collage of Santa Claus on a bunch of shower of sparks, and this isn't.
Go ahead.
This is the first Christmas compilation tape on my label TPOS from 1989, if I recall correctly, and we did a whole bunch of them. There's I Hear Bells. There was this one, Oh Hell Noel. We've got What's This Got to Do with Christmas?
These are all, as far as I know, still available from TPOS.
They are indeed, and I guess we're going to sneak the commercial in right now. If you go onto Discogs and or eBay and look up TPOS, you will see these fine Christmas cassettes. Christmas Crushing Contest is one of them. And the bands we're talking about now with Mr. John Howard, Spastic Backhoe, as they originally were, and later Freakbaby are on a couple of these. So
yes, we are.
It does tie in, doesn't it?
It does, very much so. Merry Christmas. It was very cheeky of us to call it just Merry Christmas, I think.
I know.
It sort of sneaks up on you. Seems unfair.
It was a great way to inaugurate the series. It's if I recall correctly, it's side 1, track 1.
It is, yeah. I'm looking at it now. I'm dead proud. I don't think I was ever prouder than when I heard that on the radio. I'm being sincere. That was a highlight of my life, hearing that thing come over the radio.
That was good. And another big shout out to Greg Vegas, for keeping the torch aloft at WXCI for a very long time.
I spoke to Greg just earlier today.
Yeah. He's been on the show.
He helps out with my band Nice Breeze.
Right on. And he's been on, we did a 2-hour marathon with Greg a little while ago.
Oh, I watched that. Yeah, I saw that.
If anybody missed it, once again, Malcolm Tent, I got the YouTube channel. Look up Malcolm Tent on the YouTube, and also on my Facebook. You can just scroll back and find the interviews. Greg was an excellent guest, a huge font of information about.
Very much a smarty pants and has all of the info and has seen it all, and it's great.
Yeah, but he never worked at Trash American Style, so he doesn't have that.
Oh, fuck him. Fuck him then. Fuck him. That's over.
Yeah. So what I need to know, man.
But anyway, it was fun working there with Chris, because he and I, of course, we like a lot of the same shit. So we were very simpatico working there. It was very easy just being there all day, hanging out. I lived in downtown Danbury, and I'd walk there. It was great. But eventually it was like all jobs like that, I need to pay rent. I need to be able to buy clothing instead of just pull them out of the cardboard boxes that are underneath fucking trash. And I need to, I can't just live but there's no, I know, because I grew up, my parents owned a small business. I know that I knew, you're transparent. I knew how much money was there. It's not like I'm like, why didn't he make me manager? That 40 grand a year would have really meant something to me back then. But no, it's just
to most of us, John Howard, it would have been an awful lot.
Seriously, we could have bought more cheese sandwiches from the diner next door.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So ultimately, that's you just got to grow up and go work at the other record store, CD One Stop.
Oh, CD One Stop. That's a name that hasn't come up yet. That's another.
Oh, really? There's another hub. That was everybody worked at CD One Stop, including Daryl Ort.
Right.
And at one point or another, either worked in the warehouse or in the data entry, or I worked for. I keyed in orders, and then I did Alliance Distribution, or it was called Titus Oaks Distribution at first.
Right. I'm going to take a brief time out just to get the information, or maybe you should explain. You actually worked there. What's a one stop?
A one stop it doesn't exist really anymore in the same way. At the time, it was an independent seller that you could go to quickly buy CDs without having to set up a deal with the majors. Which could be expensive, and you had to buy certain amounts. So if you were a smaller independent record store, you could get a wider range of product for just slightly more money from a one-stop than if you tried to set up a deal where you had to buy hundreds of copies of a major label release in order just to buy the Sonic Youth record that you would like to have.
Right.
And so those are one-stops. Ask me sometime about how they destroyed the one stops, and how the company that I worked for, Alliance, bought up slowly. Alliance and Bassin bought up every single one stop and turned it all into a network that became the Alliance Distribution that sold out to, the Warner Brothers one? Oh, what's the name of that thing? ADA, yeah. That it evolved. Basically, everything kind of morphed into that, and that's why the whole one-stop system died. Like, you know what I'm talking about in the mid-90s?
Well, you see, the thing is, I stopped selling major label.
You never did, that I recall.
Well, at the very beginning, like when we were still based in Brookfield at the Four Corners.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I would attempt to bring in some major label stuff, but I hated it. I
Right.
hated. I still do to this day. I despise the majors.
There's no reason for you to do it there, too.
Exactly.
They're covered at Record World.
even when people like when bands started to get signed, like Sonic Youth, for example, someone would come in and saying, "Hey, you got the new Sonic Youth?" I'd say, "No, go to Record World or whatever," because I didn't want any major
Right.
label stuff tainting my store.
Yeah, well, it's also a good business decision because you're not going to make as much money off of that crap. It's not, you're never going to sell enough for it to make a difference in your bottom line. Other people have it, that market covered better. You can cover everything else they don't do because they don't do anything else.
Exactly. And I just
They just do
I
the
just
majors.
I just love the fact that, if I was dealing with and here's that term again, a straight edge band, and I wanted to sell 100 copies of their record, they would just come in,
Well,
say,
yeah,
"Here you go. Here's a box of 100. All right, cool. How much? All right, take it. Done."
that was crazy how much money went through that scene, dude. Nuts, nuts. I
Yeah.
remember one of my favorite memories is the Revelation guy. You would have to talk to him on a payphone sometimes in Long Beach or something like that.
Oh God, I don't remember
This is
that.
very early on. And so you'd be trying to get Shelter Records or something like that, and the distribution network that were so shady and out there that you'd be waiting for phone calls and like maybe, do you remember what I'm talking about? Do you know what
Well,
I'm talking
the whole thing was just so ramshackle. I mean,
about? Right, right.
I could do an entire episode of just on Revelation and dealing with those guys forever. Revelation is one of those labels, and Jordan Cooper, who started Revelation, great guy. I love him. I haven't spoken to him in a long time, but Jordan, if you're out there, Mazel Tov. But yeah, ramshackle, I think, is the best way to describe how Revelation was run. So yeah, I don't remember having to make a call to a payphone somewhere, but I'm not surprised. I'm sure
It's
that's what
yeah.
I had to do.
It seemed like they never had a grip on exactly how many records they were selling.
Yeah,
And that caused problems. Like
yeah.
if they had just sort of overestimated a couple of records by their mind, they would have probably had a smoother, like they would, like pressings would go out and you wouldn't hear anything for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Well, that was the thing, we never, like, they would always announce a release date. They'd take out a bunch of ads in Maximum Rock and Roll or Flipside or what have you. One of my favorites was when the Bold album was supposed to come out. And this is when we were still in Brookfield. He'd taken out all these ads saying Bold is going to be out on August 10th. So of course on August 10th,
Hordes of kids, boom, boom, boom,
it
boom,
literally,
boom.
like, no exaggeration, there's this line of kids, "Got the new Bold?" I'm like, no. They never came. Same thing with the Gorilla Biscuit 7-inch and the compilation album. He would always advertise a release date, and the release date would come and go. And then maybe he'd advertise another one and it would come and go. And meanwhile, his entire constituency is just like
They were on
dying.
edge. It really was like, it was important. Like that day, like they couldn't just go, "Oh, all right, well, let me know when it's out." They were like, "No, where is it?"
Yeah. But once again, youth,
Yeah.
it was youth. People needed that record.
But
And
that was definitely the bread and butter there. Although there was, as we were talking about, this kind of goth dance, synthy, awesome, piercing, super gay, cool scene that was kicking around Danbury.
yeah,
And that was another big thing, was those kind of records would sell a lot. And then hardcore record people would come there, obviously.
yeah, totally. And
Everybody go to Jerosa
also,
and then come to us.
what's that?
Everybody go to Jerosa and then come to us, or vice versa, bounce back and forth between the two stores.
Yeah, because we were more or less, I mean, he was like one or two exits down on 84, and we both opened almost at exactly the same
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah, yeah.
at this parallel growth and career. And Jerosa Records in Brookfield, still at it, still same
It is.
location, still plugging away. I've always said Jerosa was my friendliest competitor. So
He's
thumbs
great.
up.
He
Yeah.
made Chris and I laugh one time because he came in and whistled along with every solo on one side of the Allman Brothers. He knew every single solo on the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore. He could just whistle everything, every one of them from beginning to end. We're like, that's
Nice.
impressive.
Well,
See, we were playing that in the store, by the way. That was the Straight Edge Boys. Used to
right.
love that one.
I love that album
No,
too. I make no bones
but it
about it.
was fun. I think one thing I think I materially changed you on was I got you to sell CDs and used CDs in particular. You were skeptical of the media, and I was like, really, you can make money at it. I think one time I took a bunch of CDs to Jerosa and sold them to Jerosa and came back with a fistful of cash and showed this is always a way to convince Malcolm. And I came back with the cash and gave it to you. And I was like, and then you're like, okay, I see.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because I wouldn't do it myself, you know.
Yeah.
I've always been very, very, very slow to embrace new technology, and I'm always very suspicious and hostile of it until someone can show me that it works. And
Right.
that's what you did.
Yeah, you were pretty quick with the computer, I recall, because I remember Mindy and I were very early getting on the internet there, and you were right behind us. I seem to recall because you were trying to get me to do stuff, and I'm like, man, I don't have the time. You're very curious about it, and there were those other guys who were doing bulletin board stuff, hanging around there at Trash.
Yes, there was a very active, very early hacker community,
Yeah, right.
BBS and all that, and I was really intrigued by that.
Yeah, I was
That was
too.
interesting.
You couldn't get in that though. Like I tried, like I got an acoustic coupler and I tried to get one of them to give me an address, and they would.
Yeah, it was very
You
much
can't figure it
closed,
out on your own. You're screwed. And
totally
I could not figure it out on my own.
closed club.
Yes. Yeah. Well, fair play to them.
Yeah, right. Well,
So
tell me, man, just let's wax nostalgic for a second. Give me a
okay.
couple of like really vivid memories, incidents, people.
Cheetah Chrome.
Oh
coming to the
God,
store.
Cheetah. Ugh.
I seem to recall, and I was sober for most of this. I recall him lying down on his back in the middle of the store, that small store, and refusing to move for a while. I don't know what his life situation was at that point. At one point, one of my favorite memories is you followed around Ace Frehley briefly when he played a bunch of shows.
Yeah.
At one of his low points, and you would come back with
92.
You would come back with tales of Ace Frehley. That's always amused me.
See, there were a lot of Ace sightings in Danbury around that time.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
Right.
he had a girlfriend who worked at the nail salon just down the road from us. So
Yeah.
he only came to the store a couple of times, but you'd see him at the gas station or, buying a pack of smokes somewhere.
He seems pretty laid back, like
so laid back, he's laid out.
But so let's see what else. The shows, there were a bunch of good shows there. Prison Shake,
Oh, yeah.
and it was supposed to be Prison Shake and My Dad Is Dead, but the My Dad Is Dead guy refused to get out of the car.
Yep, he stayed out in the parking lot the whole time when Prison Shake played.
And the other thing that for us about the Prison Shake guy is he worked as a line cook or something and had chopped up one of his fingers and was playing with only two of his fingers.
I seem to remember.
And we're like, what the hell?
We're this is splitting hairs, but I think he was a painter.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I can't remember.
But yeah, he had a crushed finger of some sort and was
Right.
still play. He played the show, man.
They sounded great. If you wouldn't have known it,
Yeah.
They were great, really good band. They were fun to watch. They played really well.
Yeah,
They were good bands through there.
They were probably one of the bigger name bands. We just had mostly local bands play, but
Right.
The occasional name.
We played our first show there, our first official show
as a quartet.
Yes, that was a curious thing. We were not a quartet ever, really.
No, and that
Only
was
for that moment.
That was a very fragile period of time because that was after Ernie had just acrimoniously departed Head, and I had joined Head.
Yes.
And now Ernie's playing my record store with Freakbaby.
Yes.
And it was
it's a music scene. It's kind of like it was interesting. And so what happened was we know why. I mean, that was a very volatile band. They would argue a lot. It wasn't a surprise that one of them stormed out in a huff at some point. It could have been any one of them, and so it happened to be Ernie. And when we had been playing together, and we're really just about, we tried to get some other shows playing out. And so finally the first one we arranged was with you. And Ernie started playing with us kind of after we already decided we were going to do that. And it sounded great, 2 guitars, and he's a good musician. But his musical thinking wasn't like ours at all. And we aren't musicians like that. Like I had only played fife and drum corps music before I joined Freakbaby. Nobody would be in a band with me before then. They flat out refused anytime they heard me play. True story. First 2 people to play with me were Chris Ludwig and Martha Hamilton.
Wow.
Everybody else refused. And people would run in horror from me.
You and 2 bass players.
What's that?
You and 2 bass players.
Yeah, right. And so he, because I was really into half Japanese, and I bought this guitar in like 1986, and I was into Einstein and Neubauten and stuff like that. And I had seen half Japanese a million times. And Jad, at that point, his guitar, he didn't pay attention to what gauge the strings were, and he would just string the guitar up and then make it not slack. And I was like, well, that looks good to me. And that was my guitar for years. Even starting HCI, if I played guitar, like I didn't play chords until I did this Velvet Underground cover band in the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
And before then, it was always that kind of stuff. But so nobody, every song ran when they saw me coming. And so those guys played with me. But so Ernie didn't, like, we were already improvising a lot. Like that jam that we put on the Christmas tape was recorded before we'd even played out, you know.
Mm.
And we kind of got our shit together in that regard and had this sort of really interesting sound. Even now listening to it, I'm like, that's doesn't sound like anybody else for sure. You know, it's a very distinctive, Elise's guitar playing. We had no tuner for the first year we were a band. We tuned off a pitch pipe.
Hmm.
And so we just were really, we didn't have a PA. We would just yell. And but anyway, so Ernie played with us and it sounded good, but he really, it was weird because he's not that kind of music. He didn't think like us. He was always very puzzled. We were always very much on the same page and he was trying to figure it out.
You know,
And
it's interesting because I actually do remember it that way, even though, I'd never seen you guys play because nobody had. It just didn't seem like a good fit.
well, the video would show, if I have
Oh,
video of it,
really?
Billy Hahn filmed it for me.
Ah.
And the sound is terrible because the sound is all blown out. But so what happened was Sonic Youth showed up in your store that day. And I think the combination of being the first thing out after Head and Sonic Youth being in the store,
Hmm.
Ernie had a tough time with that. And so something happened with the equipment. I don't know what. He never played. He sat down in his amp and the three of us played. We just basically looked over at him and went, okay, and just kept going.
Hmm.
So you probably perceived what was happening in that moment fairly clearly. And he just didn't, after that, he did not come to the next practice, but I want to give him huge props. He became probably our number one fan.
Hmm.
He was hugely supportive. He was basically that period of mystification made him realize, he was like, wow, he seemed somewhat impressed, like he got it, And when he went back to Head, they were a little bit reborn there for a while.
Oh,
I
definitely.
thought they wrote some of their great. I think going through the ringer with us made him want to stretch out as a composer a bit, and they were doing stuff like Operation Midnight Climax. You had introduced stuff, some sort of funkier, like some tighter feel to it that they took on from there too,
Yeah.
because Ernie's very much a strummy kind of noisy bassist.
Yeah.
And then they got Chris Mitchell, but they never quite gelled all the way, but it was almost there.
I that's another that's a tough call, That's a real tough call whether Chris Mitchell was the better drummer or Christian
We
Shamir
were
was the
talking
better.
about that, yeah.
I
Greg and
mean,
I were talking about that today a little bit.
God, Edward, they were just so monumental no matter what, you
Chris
know.
Mitchell is one of the most physically talented drummers, certainly in that period I've ever seen. Like I'd say technically the two best drummers I saw and remain two of the best technical drummers I've seen are him and Bill Knapp.
And,
Um,
oh, Bill Knapp, yeah.
Bill Knapp is absurd. I
Yeah,
bless him. Just
yeah,
really just an incredible like that guy can do anything at speed. It's I'm not anymore, but back then, And
yeah.
Chris was one of those guys that, yeah, it looked like he was just born to play the drums. He could do all kinds of triplets on the kick and stuff. He's very,
Uh,
very physically coordinated. Very inspiring to watch because he's always making me push myself so that I don't sound like a goon beside him. I don't sound like an idiot.
yeah,
And Marceline in general was kind of inspiring in that way because not so much I wanted to ever sound like them, but they took themselves seriously, And we never thought of ourselves as a commercial enterprise per se, but we always felt like you got to at least work in that realm. Otherwise, you're not giving yourself any credit.
right.
And so watching them be very serious and work hard and keep their nose to the grindstone, it sort of inspired you to do the same, you know, because we're playing on bills with them. We don't want to be embarrassed by this band that has their shit together with the guy who sings like Robin freaking Zander, you know.
Yeah.
You got to hold your own, and you
Yeah.
got to bring your own power to it. So same with Head, same with playing with Head. We played a lot of shows with Head, and I think generally we managed to hold our own a bit, but
Yeah.
it was, you got to do it. You got to bring it, you
Well,
know.
that's the thing, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right.
And I think the entire scene, if I might use that word, benefits when you've got bands of that caliber because it gives everybody a benchmark to
Right.
aim for.
Right. Well, and it turned out ultimately that was one of the things that sort of drove the scene, is that everybody had that attitude of not taking themselves too seriously, but taking their work seriously and trying to be good and try to do something different. Every band was different. I mean, I came from DC. You can't fool me. You know, I've seen real music, you know, as a kid, and seeing those bands in Danbury was very impressive. I mean, I was like, holy shit. And the thing I've taken away from it is not they should have been stars. I think that happens all over the place and we don't really know. I mean, there are Danburys everywhere. There are these knots, these nests of people just doing it because they can do it. Maybe some of them break out, maybe they don't, maybe, you know, but it doesn't matter because they're doing it, and it can happen anywhere, you know.
Definitely.
So.
And then the sheer volume of amazing music that there is out there is kind of staggering. And that's actually a very good point, because we've already been yapping for over an hour. So I'm going to suggest that we cut off the episode right here, right now. And then we'll come back for another episode where we actually talk about the records and the music on them that you guys made, and some of which happens to be in conjunction with some of the other bands, and we can really cover some.
Oh, that'd be great. Sure.
Yeah.
I did want to show this.
Oh yeah.
This is the flyer.
Oh, that's it.
And so if you look at the flyer, I don't know if I can get the whole thing in here. So this is the flyer, and at the bottom we said, can you read that?
Band that loves music so much that they want to kill it. They did.
And somebody wrote they did. That was how well our first show went. At Trash American Style.
Oh, you mean
the
they did wasn't yours?
No! Somebody wrote that after the show.
Oh, man.
So we were accomplishing things right off the bat.
Dude, straight off.
Right off the bat. Room clearing. Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to do. You want to take a break?
Yeah, take a little break here. And for the viewers, that means we'll be back in about 167 hours time with the next Malcolm Tent Shoot interview with John Howard. As always, I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for tuning in and sticking with us. If you want to do the morally correct thing, you will go to Discogs and or eBay and look up my label, my store, TPOS, which has not only releases by my fabulous label, but lots of really cool used and collectible and rare and not so rare records, tapes, and CDs, blah, 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 blah. That's how I keep my boat afloat. That's how I'm able to bring you Tent Talks, Tunes, and shoot interviews that are always commercial-free.
Stars like me.
And stars like John Howard. Look at this guy. He's gleaming. He's gleaming. He did his best to kill music. He succeeded.
I've succeeded over and over again. I've killed it again and again. Music is dead, but it won't lie down. It shakes its head and it moves.
Donald Most, Donald Most.
The magnificent Donnie Most.
Oh man. That's it. We got to get out of here now.
Okay.
And by the way, do yourselves a favor. Look up Donnie Most if you wonder the Donnie Most album. If you want to know what Rock is Dead by Donnie Most. If you wonder what it is we're giggling about, trust me, you'll like it.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine, man. Life is nothing but interruptions. I'm just saying goodbye. That's all I'm doing. I'm saying goodbye.
Okay.
We'll catch you later, John Howard, and we'll catch all you people. All right. Bye. Bye.
Bye.